any artist who can revive the study of painting. I wipe my eyes, and I wait for one to appear. Okay, that's the end of Chen Hongshou's remarkable essay. Okay, now we go on. I introduce the next Chen Hongshou painting we'll look at with these two photos, C.C. Wang on the left, Sherman Lee on the right, along with his longtime curator, Weigam He and Max Luhr. Wang, who was among other things a dealer in Chinese paintings, had a Chen Hongshou painting that Sherman wanted very much for his museum. But Wang, citing that well-known phrase that pairs Chen with his northern contemporary Cui Zizhong, that is, Chen in the south, Cui in the north, non-Chen, Bei Cui, insisted on selling paintings by the two of them as a pair. Next. The work by Cui Zizhong at left, which I've already shown in an earlier lecture, representing a Taoist adept traveling to heaven with his entire family, and the one by Chen Hongshou at the right, a birthday painting that he did in 1638 for his aunt. Sherman, although he didn't especially want the Cui Zizhong painting, finally bit the bullet and bought them both. Of course, he was smart to get both, because the Cui Zizhong is a fine painting too. I've reproduced and discussed the Chen Hongshou painting 3 times in my Fantastics and Eccentrics exhibition, my Distant Mountains, my Painter's Practice. It's not only a highly diverting painting, but it has a good story attached to it. Next. Chen Hongshou painted this one in 1638 for the 60th birthday of his aunt, flattering her by portraying her as a learned lady of the distant past, Lady Shan Wenjun. All this is explained in detail in Chen's long inscription written at the top of the painting. A translation of that inscription by Weigam He is in the entry for this painting in the 8 Dynasties catalog. But instead of reading that, which you can find and read for yourselves, let me read from Distant Mountains, top of page 249, what I wrote about this painting there. Chen Hongshou's Lady Xuanwen expounding the classics, painted in 1638, is another example of his use of double imagery that overlays past on present. The painting was done as a gift for his aunt on her 60th birthday, and compares her flatteringly to a learned woman of antiquity. Lady Xuanwen had been instructed by her father in the Zhouguan, or the ritual of the Zhou dynasty, a book thought to have been written by the Duke of Zhou, the regent to the first ruler of the dynasty, and an exemplar for Confucius and others of the highest virtues of that golden age. Because of its authorship, her father advised her this classic was the best source for standards of conduct, canonical precedents, and governmental organization. She studied it diligently. Later, at a time when studies of classical texts had declined to a low state, she was summoned at the age of 80 by the king to teach her understanding of the text to 120 young scholars. Some of them are seen in Chen Hongshou's painting, sitting in rows. Lady Xuanwen lectured from behind a curtain, which Chen Hongshou has raised here to allow us to see her. She sits behind a screen, a frail but commanding figure, with wisdom in her wrinkled prune face. The landscape, painted on the screen, echoes in style the landscape with which the whole painting opens in the foreground. This correspondence, besides providing another double image effect, brackets the space occupied by the figures. The location of that space in the far middle ground, as in the case of similar compositions we've considered, removes it from the realm of present reality. Where Chen exposes himself openly to the viewer's inspection in his 1635 self-portrait, he allows his aunt, or her assigned antique image, to recede decently into the distance. Such distancing in time and space is emphasized by archaistic elements of style, the long-sleeved robes and the elongated faces of the male figures, drawn from some pre-Tang model, the fungus-shaped clouds, the firmly outlined distant promontories, the additive character of the whole composition. Coloring with rich contrasting pigments gives the painting more decorative beauty than our reproduction can convey. Okay, so much for the quotation. Now back to the regular lecture. Jesus, I hope I can finish this. Okay. Continuing. What I would like to call your attention to here, and more broadly for Chen Hongshou's paintings, is that the image of the old woman is a double image, the learned lady of classical antiquity and aunt. In my writings on Chen Hongshou, especially in the compelling image chapter centered on him and his self-portrait, I've called attention over and over to this subtle quality of his central figural imagery, a quality that isn't peculiar to him. Wu Bin does something like it for landscape painting, but is especially strong and effectively employed in the works of certain late Ming artists. Is the woman in the He Qianzhang portrait He's real concubine, or an ideal picture of a woman? Answer, she is both. And the superimposed image is in itself a commentary, as we can take it to be, on the status of women in that society. How much individuality are they permitted to display? Next, please. Chen Hongshou's self-portrait is at the same time an image of the ideal scholar gentleman seen with his servant in the landscape. Chen means to call up that conventional imagery and overlay it onto it his particular ironic comment on his personal situation in a debased world. Irony is perhaps the best word for the relationship between these real and ideal images. And in my compelling image chapter, I argued that behind this irony is a dense overlay of engagement with an ideal culture of the distant past onto a bitter acceptance of their inability to recapture that ideal for their own time in its original form and with its original values intact. I deeply believe that recognizing the complexity of this overlaid imagery, as I've tried to do in various of my writings, is a key to understanding late Ming painting in a way that really gets under the surface. Let's keep that complex observation in mind as we turn to the last of the Chen Hongshou paintings that we'll look at in this lecture, his hand scroll representing the 7 sages of the bamboo grove. Now, on to the hand scroll painting by Chen Hongshou that is our main subject today, the hand scroll representing the 7 sages of the bamboo grove. Those of you who watched our first series on early Chinese painting will remember from the third lecture on 6 dynasties painting the designs of tomb tiles found on the walls of tombs near Nanjing, representing the 7 sages of the bamboo grove, actually showing them beneath trees. Chen Hongshou didn't know those images, but he did have the opportunity to see old paintings, probably mostly while he was serving briefly in the capital as a painter. Next. Some old model must underlie his painting, his placing of the 7 sages in a grove of trees instead of among bamboo, as we see here in a preview of one section of his scroll at the right. Also, his understanding of pre-Tang figure painting, next, is clearly visible in the way he portrays the individual figures with elongated faces and robes drawn with continuous fine lines. Just as landscapists in the Orthodox school assumed a certain knowledge of antique landscape styles in their viewers and used stylistic allusions that those viewers would recognize, so Chen Hongshou assumes some familiarity with early figure painting, even if it was only in copies and imitations in his audience. Next. And still later artists were to allude back to Chen Hongshou, as Luo Ping does in the 1799 painting that we've used for the title and ending credits for this series as an ideal image of gazing into the past. In trying to convey some sense of how these highly sophisticated allusions to old styles worked in later Chinese painting, I used to draw on my love of certain recent and contemporary French composers, notably the disciples of Satie, known as Les Six, the 6, and especially among them Francis Poulenc and Darius Milhaud. They could conjure up bittersweet evocations of romantic music with tinges of popular song. The effect is hard to describe, but the musical among you will know what I mean. Once when Max Lohr came to visit me while I was a student in Ann Arbor, I played for him a recording I had just purchased of a Poulenc piano concerto that evoked and somewhat or semi-parodied romantic styles in music in this way. And when it was finished, Max said gravely, "Composers should not be allowed to write such music." And he was perfectly serious, dead serious. It was for him a desecration of the German Romantic styles that he was devoted to. But enough of that. I've either conveyed my point about stylistic illusions, or I haven't. On to look at the paintings next. But one more image before we turn to the scroll. This photograph of Walter Hochstetter, familiar already from earlier lectures about paintings that he owned. During my year as a fellow at the Metropolitan Museum in 1953-4, Walter showed me the paintings that he kept rather secretly in his New York apartment. And a special treasure among them was this Hongshou hand scroll of the Seven Sages. Here is the scroll in 4 sections. I'm going to show the 4 color images just as a preliminary. Walter never tried to sell the scroll. Along with one other hand scroll painting he had, a Yuan Dynasty picture of horsemen, he kept it as a valuable personal possession. He permitted me to reproduce in my compelling image book 3 sections of it, including the crucial ending, more of it than had been published by anybody before. But he still reserved the first section, his special favorite, to publish himself. After his death, his heirs put the scroll into auction at Christie's Hong Kong in autumn 2009, and it sold for a big price. But then the buyer was told by 2 Shanghai Museum curators, Shan Guolin and Zheng Yinlan, that in their opinion it was not a genuine work, but a later copy, and the buyer returned it and got his money back. Hochstetter's heirs, James and Paul Zhu, who were sons of the Chinese woman that Walter lived with late in his life, wrote me asking if I would certify the genuineness of the painting, in my opinion, with a legal affidavit stating that, and I agreed. James Zhu, at my request, as a kind of condition really, made the color images that I'm going to use in this presentation that follows. He's an amateur photographer without the professional equipment or the expertise to make photos of the kind that we're used to. And we have to keep that in mind while we're looking at the pictures. At the last minute, I insert here a bit of new information. Just last night, I received an email telling me that the scroll has gone back to the auction, this time to Sotheby's, to be auctioned perhaps in New York, Sotheby's in March. Or at any rate, in the near future. And this gives a special urgency to my effort to convince everybody that this has to be a genuine, not only genuine, but actually a very fine, even a great work by Chen Hongshou. So if you are a millionaire with lots of money and you're going to this auction, buy this painting. Next. For this first of the 4 sections of the paintings, I'll use a black and white image. I'm sure that this is the same paintings that Walter showed me back in 1953-4, by the way, because I have good photos from that time, one of which I'll show later. This first section was Walter's favorite, and the one that he wouldn't let me reproduce when I published the other 3. It shows 4 servants of the 7 sages carrying 2 big pots of wine on poles over their shoulders, between and behind huge rocks, approaching the sages to replenish their stock of wine. 2 of the servants are seen only as heads above the rocks. Next. The upper right corner of the scroll, with what I assume is a collector's seal. The drawing is done in fine, continuous line, taken from antique painting. But seen close up as here, it can be seen to follow also, in some places, the old nail's head rat tail convention, the line being thick at one end and trailing off to a point at the other. This is only one of the many refinements that persuade me that this work cannot be a fake or copy. Next, please. I can see why Walter liked this opening so much. The rocks are shaped in strong sculptural ways with line and graded washes, and some brown and bluish color. Showing only the upper parts of the servants is a play on another old convention, by which the principal figures were revealed completely and lesser ones partly hidden. Next. The comically low-class faces of the servants, with their doleful expressions,